Hello, fantastic creatures. I'm Fantasims, and welcome to my channel. So an interesting interview was just posted today involving Laura Miele, EA's Chief Studio Officer, and Twitter is going wild with speculations about The Sims 5 becoming an online multiplayer game. Part of that frenzy has been fueled through speculation by larger Simmers, and an article reporting on the interview by simscommunity.com. Now, I am not throwing shade on any of them. My goal in this video is to get to the bottom of the issue and look at the interview ourselves to see if the speculation is warranted. This interview brings up three important topics. First, does it confirm that Sims 5 is in the works? Second, does it actually confirm an online multiplayer aspect of the game? Third, and most important, this interview actually focuses on a player-driven marketplace with user-driven content. Okay, so let's discuss them and dig in. Now, on the Sims community website, here is the part of the article that everybody is talking about this conversation right here. But instead of just reading it off of this website, let's just watch the clip from the actual interview.
The Sims is a very vibrant franchise for EA right now. Is there sort of an opportunity to do more there? I look at, what Roblox is doing and Fortnite Creative and things like that. Like, it seems like Sims, out of all your franchises, is the one that maybe is best equipped to sort of play in this world.
Yes, a lot of fertile ground here for Sims for sure. And the idea that we will build on the tools for people to play with life. That's our brand simulation. And the idea that people will be able to play with life together. And to your point, we had Sims Online that came out in 2002. So it was almost 20 years ago, which I can't believe. We certainly were ahead of our time. And I think 20 years later, we've learned a lot about how players interact, what motivates players, how players can come together cooperatively. And so, as you would imagine, as we think about the next generation of Sims, super important for us to have the best tools, the most flexibility, and for players to really expand on their creativity, remix items and objects in the world, and then do that together. And I think that's one of our biggest opportunities with The Sims is the social connection and component that we need to bring to this brand and this franchise. And the team is hard at work on the next generation of that experience.
Yeah, I think almost the create and then the share aspect of that. And I think being able to, build things that you can share with other people. Like I remember years ago, Blizzard tried a thing, was a failed experiment with Diablo of like sort of this marketplace, but it's almost like creating this like player economy, which I could see at some point even happen in a Sims where people could, build items. That happens sort of on the edge of the internet with people creating, items that you can bring into games and 3D models and stuff like that. But I imagine like as a Sims sort of becoming more of even a platform for creativity feels like an opportunity.
Mm-hmm, absolutely. It's us being able to create a framework and that players are actually going to create these experiences. And again, as they're doing it together, they're doing it collaboratively. They are sharing, they could create marketplaces and what we arm them with and the capabilities and frameworks we arm them with. And then where they take that, I think is going to be a pretty significant surprise and a pretty exciting time for us as we bring these tools and this platform to market.
So I'm actually quite surprised by the information shared in this interview, since the Sims team has given no confirmation that they're working on a new iteration of the franchise beyond job listings on the EA website. Why share such interesting news about an online multiplayer Sims 5 in such a discreet way? Well, here's the thing, maybe because it's not an official confirmation of The Sims 5 or it being multiplayer. Due to misinterpreting the interview, the community has gone wild with speculation. Actually, simscommunity.com only reports on part of the interview, even though it says the full transcript is provided. Please don't get me wrong, I love the Sims community website and they post incredible articles. I just don't fully agree with how this one is being represented. And to be honest, I had to read it a few times and watch the video to understand it better, so no shade on anyone. So let's dig a little deeper to get a better sense of the context. The inference I'm getting from Laura is that they're testing and brainstorming new ways to engage the community. She does not specifically say that it's The Sims 5 that's in the works or even a Sims game itself being developed, but in the context of the interview about the social connection component to the game, the team is working hard on the next generation of that social experience. See, the emphasis here is on social experience, not necessarily the next generation of the game itself. The interviewer seems to confirm this by saying that since The Sims is becoming more of a platform for creativity, it feels like an opportunity to expand on the social connection aspect of the game. Laura responds by emphasizing that their goal is to create a framework within the game to help Simmers create an experience together and collaborate. This makes me think not only of the gallery, obviously, because that's the main avenue used in The Sims 4 to interact with other players, but it also makes me think of sparked challenges. The sparked challenges were an attempt to really engage the community in a way that makes more sense to the way Sims 4 functions, by trying to provide a platform for builders, cast creators, and storytellers to engage with each other in a way they can share their creations and foster deeper communication with each other around those creations. Now, many in the Sims community didn't find the sparked challenges a success or a great way to represent the depth and diversity of players as a whole, but I do think the team deserves credit for experimenting with new ways to engage the community that goes beyond just posting builds and Sims to the gallery. Personally, I find the gallery quite frustrating, not only for the glitches and the popularity contest that often goes on, but also because it's quite boring and difficult to communicate with other players as a social platform versus online social media platforms like Twitter, YouTube, Facebook, and so on. And of course, the gallery fails to incorporate Simmers who play the game and places the greatest emphasis on building and cast creating in the game, which gives the impression that the focus of the game is on set dressing rather than gameplay. If anything, a big complaint in the community has always been the focus on building and cast creations over gameplay representation. And I feel like the Spark challenges were an attempt to also spotlight gameplay creativity through storytelling. Of course, it did not fully represent gameplay because most game players in The Sims don't know how to turn their gameplay into a machinima-styled video. However, I do think it was a step in the right direction in terms of testing out ways to bring the community together. I also think the thriving Sims community on Twitter, YouTube, Instagram, Tumblr, Facebook are so much better at engaging the community that I feel they're trying to figure out how to translate that into the game infrastructure itself. So going back to the interview, they actually talk about how they are trying to bridge that gap between social media and gaming across all EA games.
Yeah, and I think what's also happening, at least I sense, is that some of the social media platforms are kind of experimenting in this world. Certainly Facebook's, done a lot in sort of AR, VR, and Snapchat with Bitmojis and everything. And so there's these social networks kind of playing in this space to some degree. And then there are the game companies that are, becoming more social, but using sort of games and interactivity at the core of it. And I'm curious I sense this sort of coming, not conflict, but sort of, tug of war between sort of game companies and social networks to sort of figuring out how this all ultimately manifests itself as this metaverse. And I always think that gaming and interactivity really is going to be the core of what you're going to do there. You're not just going to chat with people. You're actually going to want to do things, and think of, EA Sports, like the killer mini golf game that you guys could do, or things like that, sort of in these spaces. Like how, not that you're going to release a $60 mini golf game, but like it would be really fun to have sort of, something that you could play with your friends and do that. And I'm just curious, like, how does that factor into your roadmap at EA when you're used to doing these, traditional kind of yearly sports releases? And I remember there was like EA Sports Big and other things off the side. Like, do you look at that and say, hey, there's something fun we could do in this space? And I guess my big question is like, well, what does that look like? Like, is it this sort of free to enter, EA Sports verse, or is it, as you said, is it a mode of FIFA, right? And like, how do you start to sort of, introduce those concepts?
I mean, people are, you and I talked about live services earlier today, right? And so the idea that people interact with us every day as it is, and we show up every day to provide experiences. I think some of it is going to be knitting some of these together. I like your idea in thinking about how to think about our content in a different way. Do we work for 4 or 5 years creating a big epic drop of a game launch versus, hey, we can have episodic content, so we can have programming, almost like TV programming across an experience. And so I think some of the fundamentals may exist, but perhaps the consumption and how we launch them and how we serve them to players could change in a world like this. I think would be incredibly interesting. And I think game companies are incredibly well positioned and well poised to lead in this area. I think the things that we've been doing for decades in creating worlds, creating social experiences, creating shared experiences for people, that the scale of that technology, the scale, that the broad global reach in bringing these experiences together, I don't see any other entertainment medium or social platform with the ability to do what we have done in the past year. So I think it's going to be a really great evolution and a great build, and the connection of a lot of things that we do coming together for the future of this idea of an aggregation of a lot of people coming together and having shared experiences.
So it doesn't say anything about a multiplayer function to the game per se, as in other players being able to come into your created world and interact with your Sims and builds. Instead, the focus of this entire interview is this: players shaping the marketplace of the game. Listen to Laura's wording. It's us being able to create a framework, and that players are actually going to create these experiences, and in the end, it's doing it together, doing it collaboratively. They are sharing. They could create marketplaces. Listen to that wording, they could create marketplaces. I want to focus on this wording for a second. This marketplaces phrasing. What does she mean? She references that Sims equips players with the tools for creativity, but it's the players themselves that are going to shape the game in a way that creates marketplaces through their creativity. So for example, the recent collaboration with custom content creators for the anniversary update for Sims 4 could be an indication of the direction they're heading in. I don't think they're aiming to repeat the actual marketplace of Sims 3, but I do think they're trying to figure out ways to market the creative ways Simmers customize their games. In the full interview, Laura says that across all the games in EA, creativity and expression and creating your own objects is important. This is actually really smart from a business perspective. Instead of limiting the diversity of game content within the Sims team, they could outsource to custom content and mod creators in the community to develop gameplay features, animations, cast designs, and build objects through the community and turn them into something profitable. Now, understand me, I am just speculating one way in which this whole idea of marketplace could be interpreted based on recent events. This interview might not even be about making money off of custom content. I'm not sure if they're talking about marketplace as a term for sharing content across players, or if they mean marketplace as a monetary function. In the interview, they talk about the ability for players to share objects and incorporate player-made content in real time in the game. So they could just be referring to the creation of a better platform to share custom content from within the game. So for example, instead of having to download custom content externally from the game, like when you add files to your mod folder, it might play a role within the game instead and be accessible for all players to use without having to download external files into the game. That seems to be what the interviewer and Laura are hinting at in this clip.
Creating this like player economy, which I could see at some point even happen in a Sims where people could, build items. That happens sort of on the edge of the internet with people creating, items that you can bring into games and 3D models and stuff like that. But I imagine like as a Sims sort of becoming more of even a platform for creativity feels like an opportunity.
Mm-hmm, absolutely. It's us being able to create a framework and that players are actually going to create these experiences. And again, as they're doing it together, they're doing it collaboratively. They are sharing, they could create marketplaces and what we arm them with and the capabilities and frameworks we arm them with. And then where they take that, I think is going to be a pretty significant surprise and a pretty exciting time for us as we bring these tools and this platform to market.
So the marketplace they are referring to might have more to do with the introduction of virtual technology and them exploring a huge shift in how games are made as a whole. Laura talks about this concept of the metaverse, which is how the internet is virtually experienced, and how to incorporate that dynamic into the infrastructure of their games across all EA games. Based on this interview, it seems like even they don't fully know how to do this, but that they're exploring that at the moment. She even talks about episodic content being released like a TV series versus spending years coming up with a complete $60 game in one go. Now, they're not talking about an actual TV show, but that an entire game could be produced in installments that are shaped around player feedback and the way in which players prefer to play the game. Although that's not in reference to Sims specifically, but as an idea they have had about their games in general. Listen to this clip.
Do we work for 4 or 5 years creating a big epic drop of a game launch versus, hey, we can have episodic content. So we can have programming, almost like TV programming across an experience. And so I think some of the fundamentals may exist, but perhaps the consumption and how we launch them and how we serve them to players could change in a world like this. I think would be incredibly interesting.
So here's my final thought on this interview. The entire segment on The Sims is within the context of gaming as a whole being taken from a linear experience to user-generated content. So for example, a linear experience is you download the game, you play it by yourself, you walk through point A to point B in the game, and then you're done. They're trying to branch out and create a gaming experience that feels like it's incorporating aspects of social media into it, aspects of sharing your creations with other players, aspects of playing the game with other players. And that can look different for each game, but across all of EA games, they're trying to incorporate ways that make it feel more inclusive, that make it feel like it's bigger than just a game that you plug into by yourself and go from point A to point B, if that makes sense. It's also important to note that Laura mentions the way that this will look will vary depending on each game, and that relies upon the teams of developers for each individual game, because because she notes that they understand the players and the game better than she or someone else in EA dictating how that's going to look in each individual game over all the different kinds of platforms.
EA has such a diverse portfolio of games. I remember a few years ago there was lots of drama about, was EA no longer making single player games? Everything was multiplayer. And then he came out with, Jedi Fallen Order, which was, an amazing story driven game. And now we're talking about, the metaverse and live service and mobile, and then you bring in Glue and Codemasters. I'm curious, like when you look at all these opportunities, like the metaverse is clearly a huge, idea at least. How do you apportion, resources towards something like that? Like it's fun to brainstorm, but then you've got all these games to ship, you've got all these different priorities. Like how do you decide on the development side, how to even, scale that or begin to resource that?
Well, I think that at Electronic Arts and with our creative teams, a lot of these ideas and experiences need to come from the game teams, and that they need, because they are so close to their players. And I think that they really can see the big picture about how to bring these experiences together. And then we have technology requirements that is a platform. And we as a company have been investing in that for a long time. We have a player network. We are one of the few companies, to your point, we have a broad breadth of games and diverse franchises and brands. Electronic Arts is one of the only games in the industry where if you came into Sims, we would recognize you, Jeff Keighley, as you're in Sims, and you could come in and play FIFA, and you can come in and play Battlefield, and we know who you are when you come in. And we're one of the few companies that actually has that unique user ID across all of our games.
The interview also digs into how the pandemic work-from-home environment has dramatically shaped the way that games have been worked on, and how it's actually helped them discover what tools the gaming developers and players need to improve the game creation in the future. I'm not going to show the clip, but if you watch the interview, Laura actually talks about the difference between the tools that the developers need versus the players, and how they actually want to put stronger tools in the hands of both the developers and the players with future installments of their games. So this whole interview is about the gaming industry as a whole and how it's changing in these upcoming years. So this whole speculation about it becoming a multiplayer game and that this interview is about Sims 5 is unwarranted. It doesn't fit the context, and I think it's putting words into Laura's mouth. Now, I could see them incorporate some sort of feature that allows you to play alongside other Simmers, perhaps like Second Life in an optional online mode for the game, but I truly do not think they would shape the entire game around an online experience. That kind of gameplay would be invasive to the single-player design that has grown this franchise for 20 years. If they were to do that, it would most likely be a spin-off of the franchise rather than a core aspect of Sims 5 or Sims 4, if that is in fact what is being developed right now. And this is a new era of gaming in general, so this franchise of The Sims and other games will grow and change with the times. But I don't think that we have to freak out thinking that the entire infrastructure of how The Sims functions is going to shift. We have to keep in mind that at the end of the day, EA and The Sims are a business, and they want to retain the loyal players of the game as well as reach out to a new audience. So I highly doubt that they would turn The Sims into a multiplayer game like Fortnite, because they would lose a lot of players. From a business model, it costs a lot more to try to attract new players than to build off of the ones they already have. Let me know in the comments below what you think of this interview. I'll have the link to the interview and the article from the Sims community in the description below. Let me know what you guys think. Feel free to share any points you think I missed out on, anything you picked up from the interview. I hope you found this informative and enjoyable, and until next time, I love you guys so freaking much.